Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and today we're going to be continuing our coverage of the main syndicates, the factions that you'll find in Star Wars Outlaws. In our last video, we talked about the Crimson Dawn, a very unique syndicate with a very specific set of goals. Today, we're going to be moving on to the Hutt Cartel, one of the oldest and largest criminal organizations in the galaxy. They have an uncanny ability to survive in the most difficult political and economic climates. The Hutts are perhaps one of the most vicious, arrogant, and dangerous species in the entire galaxy. They're physically quite tough despite their engorged and lazy appearance. They actually have thick, energy-resistant skin, extremely powerful muscles that allows them to move surprisingly quick, and they're able to deliver deadly blows with their tails and fists. Size and weight matters a lot in all aspects of combat. You think those MMA fighters you see on TV are deadly, like those guys who weigh under 120 pounds? They're definitely tough and skilled, and they could probably kick most people's asses with their tiny little kicks and strikes. But this chubby, less athletic looking guy who might be twice their weight, if he actually hits you with that kick, you're done. So while Jabba might look like a piece of shit, he's actually survived multiple assassinations and enemies trying to kill him, and he's mostly done it with his own bare hands. That, and he's also, sat on some of his servants, tragically killing them. Probably an accident. So while I wouldn't say that this is the peak male physique, don't think just because the Hutts look literally like lard asses that you'll stand a chance against these 2,000-pound behemoths. Just think about how much muscle and power you need to move that much weight. You're basically in the room with something that could kill a grizzly bear unarmed. Heck, Jabba the Hutt doesn't even need a Rancor pit. He's just lazy. Most Hutts were. And they're also quite disgusting as a species, both from their presence and smell. They're also disgusting in how they viewed the galaxy and how unscrupulous their business practices were. They just were ruthless, and they didn't care about other beings. And there's basically no loyalty amongst the Hutts. Each one is constantly trying to destroy their competitors, climb up the ranks, even at the expense of close family members. They're both apex predators, but also bottom feeders and opportunists. They live to be over 1,000 years old, but also look for the quickest and easiest way to profit. They're truly a very contradicting and confusing species. The Hutt Cartel was ruled by the Grand Hutt Council, and they were informally known as the Five Hutt Families during the late Republic era. That is an homage, I think, to the five families, the Italian mafia that ruled New York City in the 1930s. Now, honestly, if you want to know more about the Hutt Cartels, you're not going to find as much information and lore in canon. You're going to have to go into the expanded universe, in my opinion. There's a lot of awesome content and just really weird, wacky things about this species. In Legends lore, the Hutt are really grandiose and have that old money. You really get a sense that they're extremely powerful and corrupt. And there's an entire network that actually serves beneath them that does all of their dirty work, including species like the Talandi Till. These were gigantic alien cow-looking things that basically came from the same homeworld as the Hutts do. They have this sonic ability which was usually used to create pleasure in the females of their species for mating, but when used against other sentient beings, that pleasure could become so overwhelming that they depend on it, like drug addiction. And so the Hutts used these Talandi Till to actually set up a religious retreat on one of their colonies where they attracted lost souls who were then basically mesmerized by Talandi Till and then fooled into working in what actually was a spice processing facility. It's a really out there and interesting story, and you can learn more about it from the novel called The Hutt Gambit. I highly recommend you guys check it out if you're interested in alien species. You'll also find out a lot more about the internal politics with the Hutts and how they do a lot of cloak and dagger stuff to try to unseat each other from, their positions of power. And there's also a lot of information about Han Solo in his earlier days as well. So anyway, these five Hutt clans had to pretend to be cool with each other, at least out in the open. But they would spend most of their time killing each other's thralls, associates, and, try to steal or at least hamper each other's criminal operations. Killing another Hutt was a much bigger deal. That's a line that most Hutts didn't cross unless something serious was going down, and you usually had to have some kind of clearance from the Hutt Grand Council to do these kind of hits. As far as business goes, the Hutts typically dabbled in slavery. They viewed non-Hutts as lesser species. They were an extremely arrogant and elitist group of slugs. They also practiced piracy, spice running, processing, smuggling illicit goods, and of course, gun running. Hutt space was located in a very strategic area of the galaxy that allowed them to control many hyperspace lanes running from the core regions to the Outer Rim. Actually, during the Clone Wars, both the Separatists and the Republic desperately competed for the Hutt's favor in order to have access to these territories and to these hyperspace lanes. The Republic would ultimately be successful, and the JAR would use Hutt space as a refueling and logistics center, and this would really help them gain access and create a lifeline to their forces that were cut off by the CIS Navy in the Adoran territories early on in the war. Each Hutt family owned a considerable amount of territory, several planets, and also multiple criminal operations, along with a retinue of bounty hunters and smugglers that worked for them. They were also well known for employing Gamorreans, Nikto, and Klatunians as muscle in their organizations. Together, all of this territory making up Hutt space was actually quite massive, and so all throughout history, they were basically a third party that had a lot of power and resources, and they were able to sometimes change the course of a war if they wanted to get involved, which they usually did not. And this is why the Hutts typically did better during galaxy-wide wars, because they would just stay neutral and try to profit from both sides of the conflict and enrich themselves. As a result, the Hutts have outlasted many other larger factions, and they had that generational wealth collected as a result. During the High Republic era, the Hutts actually were threatened by the centuries of peace that had endured and saw it as a negative thing. Now, while the Hutts benefited directly from chaos and crime and just disorganization in the wider galaxy, they actually hated having that kind of stuff happening in their own territories. They just didn't like being challenged or threatened at all. In short, they were kind of cowards, and when facing actual threats, they usually folded in order to survive. Perhaps the 1,000 years of peace running from the Ruusan Reformation to the Clone Wars also affected the Hutts, because in those last 2 decades during the late Republic era, they basically saw a massive decline in their power. Jabba the Hutt was one of the most notable individuals in the Hutt cartels. He was always particularly good at maneuvering the complicated politics that ruled their society. Jabba was a bit different from the rest of the clans. While most Hutts enjoyed swampy, humid world environments that reminded them of their home planet, Jabba carved out a small little enterprise on sandy Tatooine, far away from the rest of the council. This allowed Jabba the Hutt, who was quite young at the time when he developed this operation, to basically grow unharassed, and he would mainly focus on gun running in those early years. Eventually, his operation grew to such a size that it attracted one of his rivals, Gardulla the Hutt from the Basadi clan. She would attempt to seize control of the planet Tatooine by rehabilitating the old pod racing course outside of Mos Espa and organizing the Bootna Eve Classic, which promised to be an extremely popular pod race event that could bring in tons of revenue for the Hutt clans, primarily through gambling, and it would also bring favor from the local populace. This was such an important event for the Outer Rim that the Sith, via Damask Holdings and the IGBC, would actually invest in this event. But Jabba the Hutt would hijack the event for himself and make his own deal with the Sith. The Bootna Eve Classic would be his event, and that would cement his rule over Tatooine. As Jabba's power rose, Gardulla's power would fall. And then during the Clone Wars, when Maul and the Shadow Collective came knocking at the Hutt Council's door, demanding that they bend knee to his organization, Jabba parlayed and agreed to work with the ex-Sith Lord, which was the only way he could avoid the fate of Aruba, one of the members of the Grand Hutt Council, who had defied the Dathomiri warlord and lost his life as a result. Maul would fall later on, as well as would his Shadow Collective, when Palpatine and later the Republic came knocking on Mandalore's door. Jabba would survive this event as well. Each time a cataclysm affected his opponents and even his allies, Jabba would just seize more territory and take advantage of the situation. He was really just a opportunist in every way. During the rise of the Empire, Jabba the Hutt made sure to stay out of the way of their growing military power. But after the Battle of Yavin 4 and the attack on Cymoon destroyed a massive amount of war material, the Empire becomes desperate for more resources and specifically more weapons, and they end up contacting the Hutts for this. The Hutt Cartel would develop a very special relationship with the Empire. The deal was that the Empire would protect the Hutt clans from other criminal syndicates, and in return the Hutt cartels would provide all sorts of different services for the Empire, from resource extraction opportunities to securing slaves for the military-industrial complex. They even ran black site prisons for the Empire's most dangerous enemies, and loaned out and managed bounty hunters and assassins for Darth Vader. The Empire, especially in its earlier years, still had to hide its dark secrets from the Senate and the citizens of the core. They still had to pretend that they weren't completely evil scumbags. This special relationship between the Hutts and the Empire actually made other gangs quite jealous, especially because the Hutts sort of had immunity. They could do whatever they wanted, and if anyone attacked their ships, well, It was like they were attacking the Empire. But then a series of events would lead to the destruction of most of the Hutt Cartel's power structure. Jabba had hired an individual named Han Solo to carry out a routine smuggling run for his organization. Unfortunately, his ship, the Millennium Falcon, was stopped by Imperial law, forcing Han to jettison his cargo, which turned out to be a ton of spice. And of course, that really pisses off Jabba the Hutt, and he sends bounty hunters after the smuggler. Han Solo would end up getting captured by the bounty hunter Boba Fett at Cloud City on Bespin, but Boba Fett would actually lose Han Solo during a stop in Al Hudda. That's where the Crimson Dawn came along. They would steal Han, and then they would create an auction and invite basically all the various criminal syndicates and power brokers in the galaxy to attend. During this auction, Jabba the Hutt wins Han Solo for 1,000,000 credits, but then Darth Vader arrives out of nowhere and demands that he is given the smuggler. Jabba is smart enough and once again makes the right choice and relinquishes his claim. It's at this point Boku, another Hutt who's working for the Crimson Dawn, orders his forces to attack the Imperial shuttle carrying Solo's body, which leads to an all-out battle between the Empire and the Hutts, which leads to Darth Vader boarding the Hutt Council's yacht and slaughtering everyone there, the entire leadership. This does two things. One, it makes Jabba the Hutt the sole surviving member of the Grand Hutt Council. He becomes far more powerful, and he also happens to still have a decent relationship with the Empire, and Darth Vader specifically. He did not take place in this crazy attack against the Empire by Buku. And so the Hutt Cartel's power also shifts more to Tatooine. And so as you're cruising around the Dune Seas in-game on your speeder bike, realize that despite the remoteness of this planet, there is quite a lot of power concentrated in this one area. Now, we're not 100% sure if in the game the Hutt Council has already been destroyed or if Jabba the Hutt is the main player in the galaxy. I guess you're just going to have to tune in and find out later on when we play the game. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.